All right. What is going on, everybody? It is currently 8:31 p.m. Thursday, February 1st. Uh, Loaded championship Sunday last week. Let's start in the AFC, where the Kansas City Chiefs knocked off the number one seeded Baltimore Ravens by a score of 17-10. Uh, I'm not surprised that the Chiefs won. I mean, the Chiefs have the best quarterback head coach combination in the league with Mahomes and Andy Reid. Uh, but most of the time when a team doesn't, it doesn't gel for a team in the regular season, it's likely not going to happen in the playoffs. We see it countless times in the NFL, in MLB, in the NBA, NHL. Like college football, college basketball, like most of the time, once you get to that point in the season, what you see is what you're going to get. I remember like the Jameis Winston Florida State team that the year after winning the national championship in 2013, the next year they won all those one score games. They had to come from behind a lot of time in those games, and they got in the playoffs, which they shouldn't have been in the playoff. And everyone was like, well, this team can beat Oregon and get to the national championship. And, I bought that. And then guess what happened? Florida State didn't show up. So, most of the time, what you see in the regular season what you're going to get. The Chiefs are breaking that, though. Like, this team didn't look like a Super Bowl contender in the regular season, as foolish as that sounds, but they didn't look like it. And I had a hard time believing they were just going to put it together come playoff time, but sure enough, that's exactly what has happened. And I don't think the Chiefs have turned on the switch. I just think they're clicking at the right time. It took a while. Usually it doesn't take this long, but it took a while. And I think they're finally clicking. Obviously Mahomes is playing well. We know Andy Reid's great. But Travis Kelce looks like the Travis Kelce from 5 years ago. Rashee Rice has stepped up. Marquez Valdez-Scantling's catching the ball. They're running the ball well with Isaiah Pacheco. Of course, they've always played well defensively this season. Their offensive line's protecting Mahomes, which it's been able to do all postseason. I think Sunday was the first time that Mahomes was sacked this postseason. So credit to the Chiefs, man. They could have just mailed it in, and said, hey, it's not our year. But championship teams don't do that. And no team has been more successful since the Brady New England era since the Chiefs. Won two Super Bowls, heading to a fourth Super Bowl in 5 years. Like, they're not quitting. And obviously, we shouldn't expect otherwise. And now they're going to have a chance to win a third Super Bowl and officially become a dynasty. I would argue they're already in that camp. But it's incredible that the Chiefs have been able to do this. When they traded Tyreek Hill in the spring of 2022, I thought, well, I took that as the end of a chapter for the first part, like part one of their dynasty. Like New England went through this with Brady. Like they won the Super Bowl 3 of the first 4 years they had Brady, or 3 of the first 5 years they had Brady, I believe. And then like they had to pay Brady. They moved on from some guys. And then they entered this lull where they went to a couple Super Bowls, lost to the Giants both times, but went like a decade long without winning a championship. That was, I guess part two of the dynasty. And then part three was, the last three, which was what, 3 in 5 years roughly. And then going to three straight Super Bowls between 2016 to 2018. So they usually come in stages. And I thought that when they traded Tyreek Hill, okay, that was the end of part one. And 2022 and 2023 were transitional years, where they probably wouldn't win it all. They're reloading. They're going to round out this roster, and they'll be ready to go in 2, maybe 3 years. And by God, they won the Super Bowl last year, and here they are with a chance to win another one. It's just incredible. Andy Reid's done an incredible job with this team. Mahomes obviously is entering the greatest of all time conversation. I might even argue he's there already. He's got a ways to go, but just an incredible job. And then on Sunday, if you would have told me that Kansas City would have been the bully in that game, I would have said you were crazy. Baltimore has hung its hat on being the more physical team all season and being the bully and punching guys in the mouth, and that was not the case on Sunday. Kansas City took it to them from the start, jumped out to an early 7-0 lead, and Baltimore seemed rattled from the jump. They were never able to get going offensively. A lot of that had to do with mistakes. There were penalties. Uh, and then you had, Zay, like a play like Zay Flowers, trying to extend to the goal line and fumbling on the, 1 foot line. And just you need those kind of things to win in the playoffs. And Kansas City got the breaks. Baltimore really didn't. And Baltimore, I thought, panicked. They threw the ball too much. Like I don't even think they ran for over 100 yards in the game. I think they finished around 85 yards. With Lamar Jackson in that run game, I'm just shocked. I thought they abandoned the run too early. There was no reason for it. Like there was a moment in that fourth quarter where I think they were down 10 and there was still like 11 minutes left in the game. They were backed up in their own territory, and I just remember Lamar Jackson taking this deep shot on like first down, and I thought, man, they are really panicking here. At least it felt that way. Uh, so credit to Kansas City. I'm still pretty surprised. I don't know what Baltimore was doing, and it's a shame. Like I thought Baltimore was the better team. I still think Baltimore is the better team. They just didn't show up that day, and that's something that's hauntingly beautiful about football is you only get one shot, and Baltimore didn't play its best game. Neither really did Kansas City, but I keep going back to that fourth quarter. Baltimore was rattled. They looked panicked. They're taking shots. They abandoned the run. Like they were really in their own way. Mistakes, penalties, just it cost them. And I've heard a lot of Lamar Jackson criticism. I understand he doesn't have a great track record in the playoffs. I get it, but I'm not going to be that guy. I still think Lamar Jackson's probably a top 5 quarterback in the NFL right now. Probably going to win his second MVP. In today's sports fanhood, like we're just too quick. Like we want to just slam these guys if they don't win a championship within the first 5 years they're in the professional league. And, that's just sometimes it doesn't work that way. Oftentimes it doesn't work that way. I always think when I would watch that Last Dance documentary with Michael Jordan, if he had played today, we would be destroying him for how long it took him to win a championship. Because it took him almost a decade to win. He got to Chicago in 1984, I believe. Won his first championship with the Bulls in 91. Kept losing in the playoffs to the Pistons, at least twice, maybe 3 times. Like, he would have been crucified today in the world of social media. We would have destroyed him. And then he goes on to win 6 championships. So it's early with Lamar. I'm not going to panic. Baltimore's a really well-run organization. John Harbaugh's a good coach. They just panicked. Wasn't a fan of their game plan. They should have ran the ball more. They shouldn't have, just panicked and abandoned the run. It was just not necessary. 10 points is nothing in today's league. That's not an insurmountable lead. You can get 10 points like that. And they were playing well defensively. Like they shut out Baltimore in the second half. Just a weird game. And a performance from Baltimore you just don't see. So, to the NFC. If you had told me before the game that Detroit was going to have a 17-point lead at halftime, I would have said, oh, wow, the Lions are going to the Super Bowl then. It sure felt that way. At halftime, I was like, golly. Like, how does San Francisco not show up this week after almost getting knocked out by Green Bay in the divisional round? You would think that they would have been focused. That's what I thought, because they clearly didn't show up against Green Bay. Credit to Green Bay, I suppose. But And I don't think they took Green Bay lightly. I just think Green Bay showed up. And San Francisco was kind of taken aback. They didn't panic. And they didn't panic in this game. And that's a credit to the 49ers and Kyle Shanahan. That's an experienced team. You know who wasn't experienced? Green Bay. You know who wasn't experienced? Detroit. San Francisco is in the position it should be in. It should be in the Super Bowl. But the fact that they were down 17 points is pretty remarkable. And that's got to get fixed. I have some serious, and I'm getting ahead of myself, but, it's concerning, but it's also a testament to San Francisco. They deserve a lot of credit for battling back. And Kyle Shanahan has, I don't want to say silenced the criticism that the Niners can't play from behind, because the track record shows that his game plan and the way his scheme works, like, it's not built to come from behind. His style of play, the quarterback situation, it's not built to come from behind. And I still believe that. But they shut people up. They shut me up. I was running my mouth at halftime and then shut up real quick in the second half. But I want to talk about Detroit, because I think Detroit gave this game away. Dan Campbell, it's in his DNA to be aggressive on fourth down, and I like that about him. There was a moment, it was right before halftime. The Lions had the ball at about I think it was inside the 5. And you could tell he really wanted to go for it. And I kept thinking, dude, like, just take the points. At that point, it was a 21-7 lead. And I said, take the points, man. Go into halftime with a 3-score lead. Don't give them any momentum going into halftime. And he eventually relented and kicked a field goal, which was the right move. But the same thing happened in the second half. There was a fourth down. I believe it was their first possession of the second half. It was a fourth down, and he goes for it instead of just taking the points. Now, there's no guarantee they would have made the kick, but he goes for it on fourth down. San Francisco can't stop a cold defensively to this point. They're down 24-10, I believe. They go for it on fourth down. They don't get it. New life in the 49ers. The game changed right there. San Francisco, all the momentum swung to San Francisco. Detroit was never able to really rally. And then there was another moment later in the game where they needed 3. They were down 3. They needed a field goal. Fourth down, they went for it, if I'm remembering that correctly, and didn't get it. Or maybe they got it, and that was the touchdown that they scored. I don't think so, though. Let me look that up real quick. Make sure I'm not misremembering. Just a weird decision. Just weird decision making from Dan Campbell in this game. And I like Dan Campbell. Let's see here. What does ESPN say? Play-by-play. Yeah, turnover on downs. Down 3. That's what I thought. So just a really weird game from the Lions and Dan Campbell. Just take the points, man. I know we're living in this league where it's cool to go for it on fourth down. All the analytics say to go for it on fourth down when it's like 4th and 4 or less. But at some point, you just need to take the points. And, 24-10 was the right time to take the points. You're down 3. I know it's the NFC Championship. You want to win the game. You don't want to tie. You want to win. But take the points. Your best chance of winning is to tie the game. You don't get this. You're losing. And you give San Francisco, like, the momentum continues to shift in San Francisco's favor. Almost said flavor. And they go down the field and score. Game over. You didn't get any points. If that had happened, if you kicked, made the field goal, let's say you kicked twice. That's 30 points right there. San Francisco ended the game with 34. If circumstances stay the same, unlikely, but if circumstances stay the same, you have a chance to at least win the game at the end of at the end. So hindsight's always 20/20. It's in Dan Campbell's DNA to go for it on fourth down, but just some bad decisions, I thought, which is a shame. But Detroit, they're a really good team. They should be back, although, there's no guarantee. And Dan Campbell said that after the game. That quote got out that he told, based on what I read on Twitter, that was probably their best shot. And and that is something I do like about him is he'll tell you straight up. He said after the game that he made I forget what the wording was, but he made a mistake. Probably a couple, and which is weird. You don't hear that a lot of time from coaches. Coaches will say that like it was there, we just didn't execute. But he straight up was kind of like, yeah, that was on me. You don't hear that a whole lot, especially in the NFL. Egos at stake. I just like Dan Campbell. It's a shame. I was rooting for Detroit because, by God, I'm not cheering for San Francisco. So it was weird cheering for a fellow NFC North team, but I didn't want San Francisco to win. I was cheering for the Lions. I like Dan Campbell. Just a shame that it had to end that way. Lose a 17-point deficit. It's terrible. So, quick preview of the Super Bowl. Right now, I lean Chiefs. I don't like the way the Niners have played. I think they're very fortunate to be in this position, obviously. They didn't really show up against the Packers. They didn't really show up against the Lions. Now they managed to win, and credit to them. But I doubt that's going to bode well against the Chiefs. And on top of that, I think the Chiefs control several advantages in this matchup. Their O-line's blocking well. Well, San Francisco hasn't really been able to get pressure on the quarterback. Chiefs are running the ball well. San Francisco's defense has, been gashed in the run game in 2 playoff games. Who's got the better coach? Andy Reid. Who's got the better quarterback? Chiefs. Everything seems to go Chiefs here. So we got another week until I got to give my pick, but right now I'm leaning Chiefs. NFL coaching circle, coaching carousel. I don't remember where we left off. I believe it was Tampa. So this week, Seattle hires Mike McDonald, who was the defensive coordinator in Baltimore. I don't love it. I really thought Seattle was going to pivot from defensive-minded head coaches, which is what they've had since Mike Holmgren left, I'm pretty sure. They had Jim Mora. Then they had Pete Carroll. And it felt like they wanted to go offense, and maybe they tried and just couldn't find the right candidate. But I was surprised that they decided to go with a defensive mind. Nothing against Mike McDonald. I think he's a promising young coach. I'm just not sure he's ready. He's only worked for a Harbaugh, I believe. John in Baltimore and Jim at Michigan, now with the Chargers. Just kind of a odd hire. I know he had a really good year. I think he's an up-and-comer, but not a large sample size. He was a college defensive coordinator 3 years ago. Just an odd hire. Don't hate it, but I'm not sold that it's a home run hire. Washington, I said a couple weeks ago that Washington was going to get one of the top candidates. I said last week it looked like they were going to get Ben Johnson. None came to fruition. I ended up being wrong. I was 0 for 4. I think I said a couple weeks ago that they were going to get Belichick, Vrabel, or Harbaugh. 0 for 3. I said last week, probably Ben Johnson, 0 for 4. They end up with Dan Quinn. And I might like this a little bit more than Mike McDonald. Dan Quinn had some success as a head coach. Most of it came with Kyle Shanahan, yes. But he wasn't terrible. Let me pull up his record. He was let's look here. He was 8-8, 11-5. That was the year they went to the Super Bowl. 10-6, made the playoffs, and then 7-9, 7-9, 0-5. So yeah, those last 3 years were tough after he lost Shanahan. But he wasn't a total disaster. And I believe, no, that team might not have. Yeah, I think that was the team. I was trying to think. Didn't that 2020 team finish strong? No, I think that was the team that finished in the top four, uh, like with a top four pick in the draft. So I don't think he's a terrible coach. He's clearly a good defensive mind, even though he got torched in the playoffs. But Dallas has been a really good defense the last couple years. He knows what he's doing on that side of the ball. He's had success as a head coach. He even made the playoffs without Shanahan. Everyone will say, well, he did it with Shanahan. Well, he also made the playoffs without him. And, I don't blame Washington. I think they wanted Ben Johnson or another up and comer offensive coach. But outside of Ben Johnson, there really wasn't one. Tennessee hired Brian Callahan. Okay. But I don't think Slovic was ready to be a head coach. There were a couple names floated out there, none that I thought were really ready. It seemed like they went all in on Ben Johnson, and they didn't get him. So they went with I almost said Dan Campbell, Dan Quinn. And it's not a bad hire for this, new owner, new GM. I still really like what they're building. Not a home run, but I don't think this is a terrible hire. Like, I think Dan Quinn is probably the third best right now head coach in that NFC North division. Probably either Mike McCarthy, Nick Sirianni. It's interchangeable. Dan Quinn, and then Brian Daboll. Not much of a separation between Quinn and Daboll. Again, I really like what Washington's doing. They got a ton of draft capital. They got a ton of cap space. They're going to be a team to watch this offseason. With as weak as the NFC is, don't be surprised if they make the playoffs next year. You never know. They got a top 5 pick, tons of draft capital, tons of cap room. This team could really turn things around in one offseason. So, other coaching news. Pittsburgh hires Arthur. Well, let me start with Ben Johnson. I was just talking about him. Ben Johnson, who was a hot name last cycle. I remember him interviewing specifically in Carolina and Houston. I said at the time, I think this is a really good. This would be a really good hire. He ends up going back to Detroit. I was like, okay, I'm not surprised. They think that they have something special there, and it turns out they do. And he elected to go back. They get real close to making the Super Bowl, and I thought he was out the door. I thought, okay, tough end. He'll go be a head coach somewhere, and that was why I was kind of down on Detroit last week. I was like, look, the future's not that bright. I'm not sure how bright the future is in Detroit if Ben Johnson leaves. It's not even if, it's when he leaves. And he comes back. So that gets pushed off a year. And we get another year with this Detroit team. Good for Detroit. They've gone through enough hardship. But, sometimes I can respect it. James and I were discussing it earlier this week, and he was like, Ben Johnson's an idiot. Washington, I think, is a good job. With that new owner, new GM, they're really doing some good things. You can develop a quarterback. And I was like, well, maybe he doesn't want to develop a quarterback. He was like, well, then you got Seattle there, loaded with offensive weapons. And I'm like, well, again, is Geno a long-term answer? I love Geno. I'm a West Virginia guy. I watched him play. I remember when he committed to West Virginia. I was 17, I think. I watched him, from Miramar to Morgantown to the NFL. Like, I got a soft spot for Geno. He's not a long-term answer in Seattle. But Seattle, to James's point, does have a pretty good roster, a good front office. That wouldn't have been a terrible spot for him. But he elects to go back to Detroit, and I can respect it. Sometimes in life you're just content where you are. And I don't think it'll stay this way. I do think he'll get a coaching job, a head coaching job. But sometimes in life you're just content. Sometimes in life you're like, I'm not ready for that. And I think that's what we have here. He's fine working for Dan Campbell. He doesn't want to rush into a head coaching job. He's not just going to take clearly any head coaching vacancy. He's waiting for the right job. Similar to what Kyle Shanahan did. If you remember, Kyle Shanahan was a hot coordinator for years. I remember his name coming up when his dad was the head coach in Washington, and Kyle was the offensive coordinator. He went from there, I believe, to Houston, or he bounced around. He went from Washington, I think, to Houston, to Cleveland, to Atlanta. Like, he really bounced around as a coordinator. I remember his name coming up in interviews, and he kept getting, like, it seemed like at the time he was getting passed over. And I thought, well, he clearly must be overrated. So when San Francisco hired him, I was like, well, he's been passed over so many times. Is this really that good of a hire? Well, turns out I was wrong. Shanahan's a great coach. He's probably the second best head coach in the NFL right now. And I think Ben Johnson's doing something similar. He's not bouncing around, but he's like, look, I like the situation we got in Detroit. We have a really good team. I have a good relationship with Jared Goff. I like working for Dan Campbell. We have a shot to win a legitimate shot. It's not last year where everyone was like, well, they got to feel good about where they are. No, we've seen what this Detroit team can do. They have a legitimate chance to win the Super Bowl. And I respect it. Wait for the right opportunity. And if you're content as a coordinator, you're content as a coordinator, but I don't expect that to stay that way. So good for Detroit. They got their offensive coordinator back. As a Green Bay fan, I'm pissed. I was like, I thought this dude was gone. We could have just taken over the NFC North. Gotta wait at least one more year. Let me get a sip of water real quick. So, coordinators were hired. Let me start in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh hires Arthur Smith to be their new offensive coordinator. And this kind of feels like a typical Mike Tomlin Pittsburgh hire. I was hoping Pittsburgh would hire maybe an up-and-comer, not a retread, and Arthur Smith's a retread. But granted, he's had success as an offensive coordinator. I think this is a good spot for him. Pittsburgh has good offensive weapons. Not a great offensive line, but I don't think they're far off from being a good offensive line. It's kind of mediocre, but not terrible. They got a good defense, good head coach. He can learn from Mike Tomlin. It's not a bad move for Pittsburgh. I was just kind of hoping they wouldn't hire a retread. That just seems to be what Pittsburgh does. They just hire these retread offensive coordinators. The difference is Arthur Smith's young. He's shown some innovation as a coordinator. He's had success as a coordinator. And he's kind of part of that Shanahan coaching tree. And there's a million of these guys running around the NFL. That's why I said a couple weeks ago, I don't know what Bill Belichick was doing. Just go get one of them. There are a million of them. And, he coached in Tennessee under LaFleur, who comes from McVay, who comes from Shanahan. So, not a bad hire for Pittsburgh. We'll see what happens there, because the reports coming out of Pittsburgh weren't great at the end of the season. It seems like the relationship between Tomlin, the organization, and the fan base is stale. Kenny Pickett, according to rumors, didn't like the fact that he was benched. So Pittsburgh, I would imagine, is going to bring in a veteran. I'd look at Ryan Tannehill, even though he wasn't very good this past year. But they'll bring in some competition. They might draft a guy. I sure would at this point. I think people give these young quarterbacks too much of a leash. Just because you drafted him doesn't mean that he's safe. I always really liked what Arizona did. They had the number. Well, no, they traded up for Josh Rosen in 2018 to the top 10 to get Rosen. Within a year, they realized it was a mistake. They had the number 1 pick in 2019, and they said, screw it, we're going to take Kyler Murray. And look how it worked out. I really think these teams that don't have a quarterback need to spend every single year, draft a quarterback somewhat early. Because you never know. You never know when one's going to hit. Even if you have a quarterback like Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers or even Patrick Mahomes, you should always be doing your research on a quarterback. That's why I never faulted Green Bay for taking Jordan Love. You never know when you're going to hit on a guy. So, Pittsburgh, I would imagine they're going to take a quarterback. I don't know about round one. I don't know about round 2 or 3. Day 3, maybe a third or fourth. Well, I know the third round's not on day 3, but fourth round pick, third round pick, I could see it. Spend some money on Josh Dobbs. That's where he started his career in Pittsburgh, I believe. They're going to go get someone. I fully believe that. Then you have Green Bay. Green Bay hires Boston College's defensive coordinator, Boston College's head coach, Jeff Hafley, to be Green Bay's defensive coordinator. And, as a Green Bay fan, I got to be honest, this came out of fucking left field. I wasn't super enthusiastic about the guys Green Bay was interviewing, at least for the first couple days, because I think the first name that was floated out there was Brandon Staley. I was like, look, I don't think it would be a disaster to hire Brandon Staley as a defensive coordinator, but let's not do this. And they didn't. And then the names got a little bit better, like Christian Parker, the DB's coach in Denver, and a couple of the Baltimore assistant coaches on the defensive side of the ball. And I'm trying to remember who else. I think the Buffalo linebackers coach. I was like, okay, this is getting a little bit better. And I was really hoping it would be one of the Baltimore assistants. And then I believe it was the same day they announced they were interviewing the Baltimore assistants. They were like, nope, we're going with Jeff Hafley. And I was like, what? And my initial reaction was like, what in the hell are we doing? Jeff Hafley, I was like, that's the best we can do? And I didn't think it was a disaster, but I was very underwhelmed, and I'm still underwhelmed. I thought this was an attractive job. Green Bay has good personnel on the defensive side of the ball. They spent a lot of resources on that side of the ball. They have a pretty good pass rush. They have Jair Alexander in the secondary. Then on top of that, Matt LaFleur is a top 10 head coach. I think Jordan Love's a top 10 quarterback. This team can win a Super Bowl if they continue to take steps in the right direction. And I was like, and you go out and get Jeff Hafley? Some dude from college? And then I looked at his resume. And it's not bad. Experience in the NFL. He coached under Greg Schiano, who's a good defensive mind at the college level. Greg Schiano is a decent head coach. Maybe not now. 10 years ago he was. Or maybe not even that far. Probably 15 years ago he was a good head coach. He clearly wasn't an idiot because Tampa Bay hired him to be their head coach. Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And then he brought in Hafley from Rutgers to Tampa Bay as an assistant. He was in Tampa. He was in Cleveland. He was in San Francisco. Bounced around the NFL as an assistant. But the most telling part was when Chip Kelly hired him in San Francisco. Chip Kelly gets fired. They bring in Shanahan and a new GM. Shanahan and who's the GM in San Francisco? Why am I blanking on it? John Lynch. Thank you. Shanahan and Lynch elect to keep him. And Robert Saleh. All first-year guys. They were like, we like this guy. He was there for 2 years, I think. 2 years. Now, they weren't great when Hafley was there defensively, but we knew that was going to be like a 2 or 3 year build. And he goes from there to the Ohio State to be the defensive coordinator. Only there a season, but he puts up incredible numbers at Ohio State as the co-defensive coordinator and DB's coach. And turns that into a head coach at college. And he really wasn't that bad of a college coach. He took Boston College to 3 bowl games in 4 years. Boston College, not the best program. And I've seen a lot of people trash this hire because, he wasn't that successful as a head coach. And I thought, you do know that head coaches and coordinators aren't the same thing, especially between the college and professional level. It's not like this dude doesn't have any professional experience. He does. Shoot, Richard Sherman's, there's audio of him out there. He spoke very highly of him. So I don't think it's a disaster. I'm a little excited about it. Once I read his scheme, a lot of blitzing, a lot of press man coverages, single safety over the top. I'm like, hell yeah, sign me up for that. After what we've been having with Joe Barry, which is just send bland four man rushes, drop everyone back, zone coverage, keep everything in front of you, the most passive shit in football. As long as you don't get beat over the top, we're in a good spot, and just let everyone just go right down the field, right down the field, right down the field for 3 years. I'm excited about this one. I'm still a little underwhelmed. I'm still not convinced that we couldn't do better. But I'll say this with Green Bay. They really needed to take a swing. Green Bay has been mediocre to bad on the defensive side of the ball for approaching 20 years. They had 2 years with Dom Capers where they had an elite defense. And one of those years they won the Super Bowl in 2010. Other than that, it's been a lot of middle of the packs to near the bottom in defense, dating back to when they had Brett Favre. And they needed to take a swing to change the culture, and they did it. I respect it. I hope it works out because they kind of need it to work out. I'm not saying that LaFleur needs to, he needed to nail this hire to keep his job, or that Brian Gutekunst needed to nail this hire to keep his job as the general manager. But they need to make this work. You can't have a fourth coordinator on this staff. Once that happens, you have to start asking LaFleur, do you know what you're doing when it comes to the defensive side of the ball? Can you hire a good coach on that side of the ball? Because he hasn't done it yet. Granted, Mike Pettin was forced on him, so that doesn't really count. He brought in Joe Barry, though. He vouched for Joe Barry. Didn't work out. Bring in this guy. You hope it works out, because then you look at, this will be your fourth coordinator. And not even a good one. Not necessarily a good one, but you have fired 3 coordinators if you fire Halfley. I don't know if they will. Just can't have that happen. So that's all the NFL talk for tonight. I want to talk about some baseball. For those that don't know, I believe spring training starts this month. And we just had a big trade in the National, or not in the National League, although technically yes, inter-league trade between the Milwaukee Brewers and the Baltimore Orioles. This happened just moments before I started recording this. The Brewers sent Cy Young winner Corbin Burnes to Baltimore for prospects. And I was texting about it with my friend Steven, who's a big baseball fan. And I don't know if this is for 1 year, but it doesn't really matter. Baltimore's trying to capitalize on this window. They have a lot of great young players. They're going to be a threat for a couple years. They really needed pitching. They got a Cy Young winner in Corbin Burnes. Huge for Baltimore. Baltimore's going to stay at the top of the AL, I think, barring any injuries. They're that good. As for Milwaukee, it's unfortunate. It's been a rough offseason for the Brewers. You lose Craig Counsell, a really good manager in my opinion, and you trade away your Cy Young winner. It tells me that this window that the Brewers had is closing. I thought it last year, and clearly the front office agrees there. They had their chance, it didn't work out, and they're probably going to start stripping it down and reloading. They're getting older. They never had much of an offense. They've always had pitching, and you just lost your best pitcher. So it's unfortunate for the Brewers, but Orioles, really good move. So that'll do it for me today. I don't even know what else to talk about. It's 9 o'clock. I got some things to do, so I'm gonna leave it at that. 39 minutes. Would have liked to have made this a little longer. No football this week. We got the Pro Bowl. Who gives a shit? Although I will say, I was hoping that Jordan Love would get some consideration for the Pro Bowl. And then it dawned on me, because I think Baker Mayfield made it as an alternate, and I was like, fucking Baker Mayfield can make the Pro Bowl and Jordan Love can't. And then it just dawned on me, like, who gives a shit? Who gives a shit? He'll have his day one day. So that'll do it for me. All right, right at 40 minutes. That's what I wanted. I'm gonna call it quits. Essentially, no football this week. Gonna have a Super Bowl show next week. I'm gonna see if I can get James on. I haven't tried to get him on the last couple weeks. I'm gonna try to next week. So, everyone, enjoy your weekend.